He planned for 40 meters. He was found at 186, the 5th of August, 2026, the Hranicka Abyss in the Czech Republic, the deepest flooded freshwater cave in the world, one whose bottom still hasn't been found. Cave diver John Encev goes under the water at 10:30 in the morning to film fallen trees. Routine work for a man who spent more than 20 years in the rescue service. Both of his cylinders still held breathing gas. His equipment was working. The plan had been agreed. 146 meters of vertical difference. To this day, nobody has explained them. In the Czech Republic, almost nobody called him by his full name. To his colleagues at the fire station, he was Hansa. To his clubmates, Enci. The full name, Jan Encev, turned up in documents, in orders, in expedition rosters, but in conversation it was crowded out by the short, homely nicknames that stick to a person for life. His first trade came from a completely different life. Jan trained as an artistic blacksmith, a rare craft that takes patience and very precise hands. Metal, the forge, working with form. A workshop, commissions, a calm rhythm, and a life where the worst risk is burning your palm. He didn't stay in that trade. Something else pulled at him. Rope, height, machinery, somebody else's disaster that has to be taken apart in minutes. Things like that either pull at a man his whole life or don't pull at all. In 2002, Encev joined the fire and rescue service of the central Bohemian region. He was given a post at the central station in the town of Kladno, an industrial center 30 kilometers west of Prague, with a coal and metallurgy past. The fire service brought together into one job everything he was already doing in his free time. Climbing, diving, machinery, the ability to work out an unfamiliar mechanism with the clock running. Here, it stopped being a hobby and became a duty. In rescue work, that set of skills counts for more than a diploma. A man who can hang on a rope and breathe underwater covers several types of call-out at once. About his childhood, about his parents, about how and when he first put on scuba gear, not a line has been written anywhere. The Czech press only took him up after his death, and by then, it wasn't the biography that mattered, but the final hours. Little is known. By August 2026, he was 54, and by that point, he had spent more than 20 years in the fire and rescue service, from 2002 right through to his last day. That's long enough for a job to stop being just a job. It shapes the whole man, his attitude to risk, to panic, to somebody else's life in his hands, and to his own safety too. 4 years after joining the service, from around 2006, Encev took on the specialization that would define the rest of his career. He became an air rescue technician. That's work from a helicopter, going down on a cable to people you can't reach any other way, to somebody on a cliff edge, in flooded lowland, on a roof, under fallen timber, in places where the ground has run out or was never there at all. Everything is measured in minutes, and all your equipment is what's on you. A mistake costs a life, and not necessarily your own. He had a second line as well, rope rescue on rock. Sheer faces, industrial structures at height, vertical technique, working on a rope in awkward positions. The same craft, just without a helicopter overhead. According to CNN Prima, in his unit he also ran the chemical side, meaning he was responsible for hazardous substances and leaks. 3 specializations in one man is a rare thing for a fire station. A man like that gets sent on the call-outs that don't fit the standard protocol. How many people he pulled out over the years, nobody will say. There's no exact count. Czech fire stations don't keep one, and Encev himself, by all appearances, didn't like talking about himself. He simply turned up for his shift. That work got him used to an environment that doesn't forgive. To smoke, to depth, to height, to the absence of a second attempt. And, if his colleagues are to be believed, it got him used to thinking calmly inside that environment. Later, they would put it in a single phrase. Where ordinary divers finished, Hansa was just getting started. About the underwater part of his life, far less is known. What certifications he held, what year he started diving in caves, who taught him, how many hours he had spent under rock, none of it has ever been published anywhere. All that's left is the judgment of the people who worked alongside him. In the Czech caving world, he had his own address. The organization ZO 105, Speleos, one of the base branches of the Czech Speleological Society. There they knew him as a cave diver, An ordinary diver in open water can go up at any moment. The surface is above him. A cave diver is denied that option. Above him is rock. There's only one way out, back along the same passage he came in by, following the guideline, in silty water, often in tight spots where you can't turn around. It's a separate discipline, with its own training and its own accident statistics. In the Speleological Society's obituary, he was called a very experienced cave diver, an excellent friend and dive partner. That wording isn't a formality. In professional communities, obituaries are written by the people who were underwater right next to you. Encev was not a member of the club Z0702, Hranicka Propast, which has been researching the Hranicka Abyss for decades. Without that detail, nothing that follows adds up. He came there as an invited specialist from outside, the kind of man you call in because you need him. You don't simply wander into this abyss. Recreational diving there is banned outright. The site lies inside a national nature reserve, and diving is permitted only within research work. Access belongs to members of the Hranicka Propast Club and to certified cave divers who go in alongside them, and only under a state exemption issued separately. A Czech specialist website puts the situation plainly. For an ordinary person, even one qualified as a cave diver, getting under the water here is all but impossible, which means every dive here runs to an agreed program, a plan, a task, limits. How many times Encev had gone down into this water before August 2026? Whether he had been on earlier expeditions, whether he knew the passages by heart, or was going in for the first time, that data doesn't exist. Neither the club nor the press has given it. From above it looks modest. A wooded slope over the river Bečva, the Hranicka Propast, National Nature Reserve, about 10 minutes on foot from the railway station. A stone funnel ringed with a fence, a viewing platform. Nothing in the landscape hints at what lies below. The dry part drops 69.5 meters. Below that is water, and water is the part that nobody has worked out to this day. Measuring it started a long time ago. The first written mentions of soundings go back to 1580. At the very start of the 20th century, in 1900 to 1902, Václav Šindela lowered a weight on a rope and got 36 meters. The first measurement you could call scientific. That figure held for decades and, as it turned out, had nothing to do with reality. In 1961, Bohumir Kopecki went into this water with breathing apparatus for the first time. He went down 6 meters. The modern history of the place is counted from the dive. After that, each decade pushed the boundary further. The 80s around 100 meters, the limit of the technology of the day. 1995, the remotely operated highball at 205 meters. 2012, the Pole, Krzysztof Starnowski, reaches 217 meters. That is still the unbeaten human depth record in this abyss. Below it, only machines have gone. In 2016, a robot passed 404 meters, and the Hranicka Abyss officially became the deepest flooded freshwater cave in the world. In 2022, the UX-1 NEO unit reached 450 meters. Together with the dry part, that gives 519.5 meters of confirmed depth. There is still no bottom. Not one instrument has touched it. The water here is around 19 degrees and saturated with carbon dioxide. For a karst cave that is abnormally warm, water like that is heated by feed coming from great depth. Judging by temperature and chemistry, the real depth of the abyss is estimated at 800 to 1200 meters, 2 or 3 times more than what has been measured. On the 5th of August, 2026, cave diver Jan Encev, invited onto the expedition, went into that water. That summer, there were tents standing by the fence above the funnel, generators and crates of equipment. A multi-day international meet was underway, part of a project called Hranicka Propast, 1,300. The figure in the name is the target in meters. The organizer, the club Z0702, Hranicka Propast, a branch of the Czech Speleological Society, headed by its chairman, Michal Guba, set the task of putting a machine into the abyss capable of reaching a depth of 1,300 meters, of reaching the bottom, if there is one there at all. The task ran up against both technology and money. The project budget was put at roughly 10 million crowns for a caving club that does its research on a voluntary basis. An enormous sum. Money like that is raised over years, in pieces. They were testing a Hungarian underwater robot, an upgraded version of the machine that had already gone down here in 2022. The old machine's limit was those same 450 meters, where it stopped. The new one was meant to go deeper. The point of this race is explained by the data from the previous expedition. When the robot reached its record mark in 2022, the expectation was that the passage would start to narrow. That is what usually happens at the limit of a karst system. By the account of the expedition members themselves, the opposite happened. The passage opened out into spaces never seen before and carried on downwards with the same cross-section. The abyss wasn't ending. It was simply going beyond what the equipment could do. After that, Michal Guba publicly allowed that the real depth might reach 3.5 kilometers. That estimate is extreme and disputed, but it shows the scale of the uncertainty. Nobody knows what's down there, and nobody can prove otherwise. A meet like that means dozens of support dives, filming, setting markers, documenting every stage of the trials. There's work for everyone. Encev hadn't come there on duty. The fire service had nothing to do with the expedition. Here he was a cave diver who had been called in to work. The clock fixes the start precisely. At 10:30 in the morning, on Wednesday the 5th of August, Encev went under the water. That figure matters, because everything after it will be counted from there. Some Czech outlets would later print 9:30, but the primary source, see a statement from the Speleological Society citing its deputy chairman, gives 10:30. The day's task looked almost mundane. He was to photograph and film the remains of fallen trees lying on the floor of the Northwest Channel, one of the abyss's side passages. Trees get in from above, through the funnel, and gradually settle onto the bottom. They're documented as part of the overall picture of the cave. Second on the list was filming the robot trials, working documentation for the expedition. The dive plan was simple and strict: maximum depth, 40 meters, time limit, 100 minutes. For a man of his level, that's an ordinary working shift underwater. 40 meters in a cave is done by strict protocol, but without any special drama. The dive was agreed from the very start as a solo dive, and that's how it was written into the plan, with support on the surface. This was not a case of a diver slipping away on his own. We'll have to come back to that. Later, the club chairman Michal Guba would say it briefly. From the point of view of his experience, this was a simple cave dive to a depth of 40 meters. No record, no first passage, no attempt to prove anything. Ordinary filming work at a depth that was routine for him. It is known that he had 2 cylinders of breathing gas with him. But the type of breathing apparatus and the composition of the gases he was breathing have never once been named publicly. Not by the club, not by the police, not by the press. Their absence will play its own part later. What comes next is the only episode of the dive that has witnesses. On the decompression line, the section of the route where divers make their mandatory stops on the way up, so that the gases dissolved in the blood have time to come out safely, Encev met 3 people. They were coming up from their own dive, working through their scheduled stops. He was going down towards them. On his way, he left a decompression cylinder on the line, a separate one, not from the 2 he was carrying. Standard procedure, that supply is only needed on the way back for the stops, and there's no sense hauling it down. The act is so ordinary that it only gets mentioned at all because the cylinder was later searched for. Then he gave the OK signal, that gesture, a ring made from thumb and index finger, the answer given underwater to a question about how you are, and he went down. Nobody saw him alive again. The rescue service's official statement said that he had moved away from the research group, and practically every Czech outlet picked up that wording. The picture it creates is wrong, as if a diver had broken away from his own people and gone off alone. The deputy chairman of the Czech Speleological Society, Jan Siratek, corrected that directly. Hansa was not part of that group, and on his way down he simply passed it. The difference matters. He hadn't strayed from his team and hadn't broken the agreed order. The 3 men he met were a different shift working to their own schedule. Their meeting on the line was just 2 timetables crossing at one point. The names of those 3 have never been given anywhere. The exact time of the meeting wasn't published either. All that's known is that it happened on the descent, on his way down. Up top, they were counting the minutes. 100 minutes from 10:30 is 12:10, the check time by which the diver has to show at the surface. 12:10 passed. The water stayed empty. Expeditions like this have a drilled procedure for exactly this case, and it worked. A standby diver went into the water at once, the man who sits on the surface in full kit precisely so he can start at any second. Jan Siratek described it in one phrase. The standby diver was sent into the water immediately. He checked all the planned zones, the Northwest Channel, the filming route, the robot's working area. The decompression cylinder that had been left was in place, and there was nobody beside it. Then the systematic search began. Club divers combed the accessible part of the cave down to 70 meters, section by section, over several passes. That mark is the limit for a diver working a search. Below it begins a zone you can't simply look into and come back from. Every few meters deeper adds hours of decompression afterwards, and that means different gas mixes and a different set of calculations. Nobody goes down there on impulse, not in a search, not in a panic. The hours went by. Firefighters and police joined the search. The cave was checked again and again, widening the sweep as far as the accessible part allowed. There was no result. Everyone who was looking for Jan Encev that day was looking where he was supposed to be according to the plan, down to 40 meters, 70 at the outside, within a reasonable deviation from the task. Nobody mounted a deeper search because there wasn't a single reason to. That would only become clear in the evening. He was an experienced diver on a simple dive. Men like that don't end up hundreds of meters down. At 7:30 in the evening, the picture from the machine's camera showed something nobody expected to see at that mark. The body was found at a depth of 186 meters, against a plan of 40. The vertical difference, 146 meters. That doesn't qualify as a deviation or a navigational error. It's a different abyss, a different range of pressures, a different physics of breathing, a zone that in the whole history of the place only a handful have descended into, and then only after months of preparation. The accounts of whose machine actually found him differ. Some reports speak of a police underwater robot, others of the Hungarian unit belonging to the expedition, the very one everybody had gathered to test. Neither version has been officially clarified. Then the technology did what no human being could do that day. The robot brought the body up to the 70-meter mark, to the upper boundary of the zone that divers can reach. There he was taken over by specialists from the Special Diving Operations and Training Unit of the Czech Police from Frederick Místek. The lift went slowly. There was no longer anyone to save. What followed was work through scheduled stages, in cold water and in darkness. At 11:30 at night, the body was at the surface, with no signs of life. 13 hours had passed since he went under the water. The expedition had come to test a machine meant to go deeper than a human being. The machine found the human being, in a place he should never have reached, and carried him up. That evening, one more thing didn't sink in straight away. In all the time, people have been diving in the Hranicka Abyss since 1961. Through dozens of extreme expeditions, through world records and work at limiting depths, not one diver had died here. Jan Encev was the first. After a recovery, the equipment is always checked. Gauges, valves, mountings, the condition of the gear. Usually the answer is there. The check produced a result that explained precisely nothing. Jan Siratek put it this way. Hansa had enough breathing gas in both cylinders. One sentence, and the whole structure of the usual explanations falls apart. Running out of gas is one of the most common causes of death underwater. A diver goes further than his supply allows, miscalculates his consumption, loses his bearings, and doesn't make it back. That isn't what happened here. The gas was there. He had something to breathe. There were no reports of any equipment failure, of a loss of pressure, of a regulator malfunction, or of entanglement in the guideline. Neither the club, nor the police, nor the rescue service mentioned any technical fault. And beyond that is an emptiness with nothing to fill it. The type of breathing apparatus was never named publicly. Whether he was working on open circuit, where every breath out goes off into the water as bubbles, or on a closed circuit rebreather, where the mix is scrubbed and used again, that is in no source at all. And the difference is enormous. These systems have fundamentally different failure mechanisms and different accident scenarios. The composition of the gas mixes wasn't disclosed either. It isn't known what exactly he was breathing or what depth that mix was calculated for. In technical diving, that's a key parameter. A mix that is safe at 40 meters behaves quite differently at a depth many times greater. Without those 2 points, a technical analysis is impossible. There is simply nothing to analyze. It's telling that the specialists are silent too. In the Czech professional world, no analysis of what happened has ever appeared. Not one expert has publicly put forward a theory. And that in itself is a rare thing for a community that normally takes every diving accident apart second by second. Formally, the investigation is with the police. Proceedings were opened on suspicion of causing death by negligence. That's what it's called in Czech law. The wording sounds alarming, and it's easy to read it wrongly. In the Czech Republic, this is the standard procedure in deaths of this kind. It lets the investigation work with documents, question the people involved, and order expert examinations. This is not an accusation against any particular person, and not a statement that somebody is to blame. Police spokeswoman Miluše Zajícová explained it in exactly those terms. The case was opened in order to establish the circumstances of a tragic event properly. Nobody has been charged. The dive plan was agreed, the support worked, the standby cover went in instantly. Nobody has publicly made any complaint about the organization. The official cause of death has not been established. The results of the autopsy have not appeared in the public domain, and as this material was being prepared, there were still none. John Hranicka declined to offer any theories at all. It is premature to draw any conclusions. Technical diving has long described what can suddenly incapacitate a person underwater, the body's reaction to oxygen under high pressure, a buildup of carbon dioxide, the narcotic effect of gases on the nervous system, and finally, a sudden medical problem with no connection to the dive at all. That is a list of what can happen in principle. Not one of these causes has been officially attached to the case of Jan Encev, and not one specialist has publicly stated that this is what took place. Without data on the equipment and on the mixes, any theory of that sort remains general speculation. And there's a question that medicine doesn't answer in any case. Why did an experienced diver, who went down to an agreed 40 meters with a routine filming job, end up at a depth of 186? That hasn't been explained by the police or by the Czech Speleological Society or by his colleagues on the expedition. Not even a presumed sequence of events has been named. Between those two figures, 40 and 186, there remain 146 meters about which nothing is known. 9 days after that dive, the town where he served said goodbye to him. The ceremony took place on Friday the 14th of August at midday in the large ceremonial hall of the Kladno Cemetery. They chose the most spacious hall there was, and it wasn't enough. Several hundred people came, family, colleagues from the fire service, cavers, divers, people from rescue services in other regions. Some of them stood outside. At the end of the ceremony, the sirens of fire engines sounded symbolically around the cemetery. It's a professional gesture of farewell that firefighters use for their own. The Fire and Rescue Service put out an official statement. In it, Encev was called an exceptional man, a professional in body and soul, a passionate and deeply respected cave diver. It ended with the words, "Honor to your memory, and we will never forget you." The Czech Speleological Society published its own obituary, signed by John Hranicka, the same man who through all those days had been giving the press careful, measured wording about the course of the investigation. In the obituary, he was writing no longer as a deputy chairman, but as a companion on dives. Jan Encev is survived by his wife and those close to him. His whole life ran in one direction. For more than 20 years, he was the one who comes for others. He went down from helicopters, worked on sheer faces, went under the water. His profession consisted entirely of other people's worst days, and on that last one, nobody could help him. Not because they didn't try, the standby diver was in the water at once. The search ran for hours. It's simply that he ended up where help physically doesn't work, and nobody knew that was where they had to look. Past 70 meters in this water, no man goes down on an emergency call. Only a machine goes there. The international diving press wrote nothing about what happened. No news items, no analyses, no discussions on the specialist platforms. Outside the Czech Republic, this story barely registered at all. A death in the deepest flooded freshwater abyss in the world stayed a regional news item. The Hranicka Propast 1,300 project has not called off its goal. What happens to it next, whether the researchers will come back to the robot trials and with what team, there's no data on that as of today. The organizers haven't spoken about it publicly, and to demand an answer from them 2 weeks after a man's death would be strange. The abyss itself hasn't changed by a single meter. Its lower boundary still hasn't been found. Beyond the deepest mark reached, darkness begins, and no camera has reached into it yet. How deep it goes, nobody knows even to within an order of magnitude. Over 65 years, record holders, expeditions with world reputations, and people working at the edge of what the body can take have all passed through this water. Every one of them came back. Jan Encev was going to 40 meters to film fallen trees. His own people called him a very experienced cave diver. He didn't break the plan. He had something to breathe. His equipment was working. He was found at 186 meters. What happened between those two marks, nobody knows. The investigation is continuing, and perhaps one day conclusions will appear that give an answer. And perhaps not. Underwater, questions like that often stay open forever. For now, this is all that's known. He went down, gave the signal that everything was fine, and did not come back.